Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another random review. Today I'm going to talk about a film that's 100 years old. It's The Great White Silence by Herbert Ponting, and this is the film that was made during Captain Scott's trip to Antarctica, where he wouldn't return with his team in 1910. This is a glorious restoration by the BFI. This is in the days where the BFI did Blu-ray and DVD, and there's a lovely booklet as well included. You can pick this up relatively cheaply, and I would urge you to do so because it is quite an amazing film. It's been restored by the BFI, and as you can see at the back there is tints used, which really keeps the film from not kind of bogging down in lots of whiteness. Other channels have talked about this film and said how amazing it is. And I would agree up to a point, but for me there's far too many penguins in it, but that's just a personal thing. Obviously when Scott decided to bring a cameraman along, obviously he didn't go the whole way or he would have probably died as well. And certainly there are little tricks used by Ponting to talk about or to show Scott's party's progress after they left the main camp, and they split into different teams. There was a lead team with Scott and then kind of backup teams for support, and it was actually on the way back after being second to Norway and actually getting there, that's when the tragedy struck, and obviously the famous one of his men saying, "Yes, I'm just going for a walk and I might be a little while." But it just shows you different times. We do get to see Scott's last entry in his journal, and again these guys believed, you're doing it for the good of the country and the greatness of the country. Now apparently, when sometime afterwards the nation heard about Scott's death, there was a terrible amount of grief and mourning for him, whereas nowadays we would probably just go, "Oh, what did they expect? It's quite dangerous going to Antarctica." Again, it's different times. It's like World War One and all the hundreds of thousands of people that went to war thinking, because it was sold as a big adventure and you were helping the king, and instead of you're just being bullet fodder. Even in World War Two, to an extent, they were still using tactics from World War One. They were leading cavalry into machine gun fire. So it's kind of different times of, people actually thought back then that the royal family cared about them, or, I suppose we still have that kind of sporting events and this idea that the whole country is watching a game of football or something, and the whole country really cares about things like that anymore. But certainly in those days, in 1910 and the 20s, obviously 1910 was before World War One, and when this film came out, World War One was over. And of course, little did they know we would be doing the rematch 15 years later. But first of all, the look of the film, the print is absolutely exquisite. I mean, that's what BFI and Eureka do better than any other boutique labels. Their silent film restorations are just stunning. If you told me this was in 4K, I would probably believe you. It's hard to believe that this is 100 years old. It looks better than some films that were made fairly recently. So it starts with kind of being quite light, with some scenes on board the Terra Nova, with everybody getting their hair cut, and of course, because we know that specific people didn't make it, obviously seeing them light-hearted and joking around does give it more emotional weight. There's even a hilarious scene with the ship's cat who is doing tricks, and we'll get to the ship's cat when I'm talking about one of the extras on the disc, because as usual BFI releases are absolutely loaded. We're introduced to the horses and the dogs, and then there's kind of a little side note of they were caught in a storm and two of the horses and two of the dogs didn't make it. The horses were from Siberia, so they were used to snow and ice. Obviously we do get extended scenes of penguins. Now obviously if people were watching this in 1924, penguins obviously would be, what are these little black and white strange things. There's also scenes of seals, which I don't mind quite as much, and there's some nice footage of some killer whales. Again, the sight of killer whales would have probably been quite bizarre when people were watching these films. There's a real high drama moment when a mother seal is trying to get its offspring back onto the ice as killer whales are approaching, but the crew happily fire a harpoon in the killer whale's direction and the little seal is saved, which to me is a little bit like going against the Star Trek directive of interfering with nature. So you have all these lovely little kind of light bits of minutiae and setting the scene and getting to know the crew, getting to know their animals before it all turns pear-shaped, and people start dying. The ice itself, obviously there's a lot more ice than there is now, is quite magnificent. It is awe-inspiring, but then it does go back to the idea of why would you actually want to go there. Again, it's because nobody else has done it. That's the thing with explorers and inventors. They're mostly psychopaths and egomaniacs, and often using the guise of, oh, I'm doing it for the country, I'm doing it for the king or the queen, but in actual fact they're probably psychopaths. I don't have as much problem with explorers, well, not the ones that then open the door to slavery and genocide, but fortunately that didn't happen in Antarctica, even though there's probably a McDonald's there as we speak. It's the same discussion that I have. I'm one of these weird people that, yes, there has been improvements made because of NASA and the inventions of NASA, but personally I don't really see the sense in spending billions of dollars sending bits of metal into space when, at last estimate, there's about 5 million children in America who don't know where their next meal's coming from. But again, that's just me. I think you should deal with all your own problems before you start trying to deal with the universe's problems, because let's be honest, all they would do is just send guns anyway. They would send guns to Venus and then claim that Venus were actually plotting against Earth and would have to go to war with Venus when you were the ones that gave them the weapons in the first place. Never mind that, I digress. So yes, certainly a sense of awe, certainly a sense of tragedy as you get to know these people that didn't make it back. And because Scott kept such a wonderful journal, we do hear his, or see his last thoughts up on the screen. And yes, I suppose he's right, he'll always be remembered. But he did come second, which Britain has done quite a lot since. So the special features, the other gem we get is 90 Degrees South from 1933, which is 72 minutes, which is the sound version of his legendary expedition footage. So fortunately there's less penguins in it, because it's about half an hour shorter. There's no tints, so it's all just black and white. But we do learn that the name of the cat began with N and ended with R, and is a racial epithet. But it's probably was named that because of its colour, because as my dad has said previously, there used to be a type of brown in Dulux and Crown paints that was actually called that racial epithet. Different times, obviously. So 90 Degrees South is it's a tighter film. I would still say it's not as good as the full version, if you like, even though the full version does have far too many penguins. From 2011 we get a Great White Silence panel discussion, which is 15 minutes long. A panel of experts discuss the remarkable restoration of Ponting's film. Sound of Silence from 2011, which is 13 minutes, which is a documentary about Simon Fisher Turner's approach to the score. Location Field Recordings 2010, which is 5 minutes, celebrated sound recordist Chris Watson's document of Scott's expedition hut. Archive newsreel items, which are fascinating, from 1910 to 1925, which is 5 minutes, actuality coverage of the expedition's departure and return. Slightly different vibe to the departure and the return. So all in all, it's an excellent package, kind of example of man's courage and bravery, and also hubris, but the fact that it's 100 years old and it looks as good as it does, and as we know, there's films made recently that will be forgotten in 10 years, let alone 100, but this stands as a wonderful testament to pushing the envelope, even although the envelope is going to crash, burn and explode, or freeze to death. So thanks so much for watching. Please let me know if you've seen The Great White Silence and what you think of it. or let me know which films made in 2024 we'll be talking about in 100 years. And hopefully join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.